Hello everybody, it's time to come back with another album review. Yes, I am getting more active with album reviews because that video I did asking if I should keep them going, pretty much most people said I should, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep them going and see what happens. Maybe I'll attract attention to the album review community, who knows. But anyway, so for this review, as you can tell in the top below, this is the review of the new Prong album, Ruining Lives. Now, for those who don't know who Prong is a band that formed in the 80s from the New York hardcore metal scene, whatever people want to call that kind of music scene. Pretty much where a lot of music took place in New York, a lot of metal or hardcore bands or punk bands. Whatever kind of music was coming out of New York, they were a part of that scene. They started off as how Tommy Victor, the guitarist and vocalist, put it, as they were being considered somewhat being like a grindcore band, which is kind of odd because Tommy Victor never really growled like a death metal or grindcore vocalist would. I guess because it was raw and fast and brutal production. I guess that's why I would give him that distinction, but really it was just more of like a brutal hardcore punk crossover sound with their demo, and that they did the Peel sessions with John Peel over in England. They put out their first album back in 1988 called Force Fed, which was a real brutal raw thrash album with songs like Senseless Abuse, Primitive Origins, and the song Force Fed. And then they went definitely more proper production, heavy metal, thrash metal, whatever, with their second album, Beg to Differ, which is probably their best disc, with songs like Lost and Found, Beg to Differ, and songs along those lines. And then, for some reason, they get credited as being an industrial metal band after that album, because I guess they had a change of sound where everything was a little more mid-pace and groove-oriented, but for some reason they get put under the industrial metal flag, which is very, very weird, because anytime I heard the stuff from that 90s era Prong, they didn't have any industrial. It was really just really heavy metal. But they took a break after their album Rude Awakening, which some people may say is their best album. I kind of disagree, or I'm on the fence on whether that's true or not. But they took a break, came back in the 2000s with their album in 2003. I forget what the bloody fuck it's called. But they've been putting out some decent stuff. But this album we're going to talk about, Ruining Lives, we're going to find out if this is probably their best work since the 90s. And we're about to find out whether or not that's true. The first three tracks, Turn Over the Barriers and Windows Shut, were solid, great tracks to kick the album off. I really thought those were songs that was really what set the tone for the rest of the disc for the songs to come. Because those songs had a lot of great thrashy oriented riffing, and Tommy Victor's voice, I tell you, his vocals still sound like they were from the 80s practically, almost, except a little bit higher up, a little bit, but it just shows you how Tommy's voice can somewhat be different on some newer stuff, considering he's getting older, but also he keeps his voice still sounding fresh. And I thought his voice was a perfect fit for this album, especially on those first three tracks. Remove, Separate Self was a solid track, though it wasn't really one that I dug very much, but I still dug it a lot, but not as much as other people did. The title track, Ruining Lives, you want to talk about some crazy stuff. This song was one of the best tracks of the album. I really, really love this track. This is actually one of my favorite songs I've heard from the bands this year. It's just an awesome track, to the point where they were doing death metal or grindcore blast beats for about like 5 seconds of this song, and they were awesome blast beats. You had a lot of thrash tempo stuff. You had some slower stuff that set the pace, that changed the pace up on me. And that's one of the big reasons why I really, really like that song, because of how much that they change the pace up and make it sound so cool. Had to take a drink of water, but I really enjoyed that song. I thought that was one of the best tracks of the album. Absence of Light is another one that I can maybe put up there as maybe best song of the album, because that song, boy, you talk about some talk about thrash. That track really, really did it up. Although it had some thrash stuff, but to me, it kind of had a similar tone and vibe of the song Snap Your Fingers, Snap Your Neck, which was from their Cleansing album, which is actually their most known song. It kind of had a similarity to it, but boy, did it change my perception whenever I listened to it all the way through. It just had a little bit of that kind of a beat drop of that song aspect into it, but overall it was just solid, groovy thrash in that song. But the Book of Change was their most thrashy song on the album. I really, really enjoyed it. Loved how the riffs were constructed on that album, or on that song, excuse me. The next three tracks kind of was on a trend downward, but they were still pretty solid tracks. Self Will Run, Riot, Come to Realize, and Chamber of Thought. Those tracks I thought were pretty good, but those weren't just ones that hit me hard enough like the other tracks on the disc. But then we get to the closing song, Limitations and Validations. I thought it was a great way to close the album off. It was a solid thrash tune with some really good riffing and some good solos. I mean, Tommy Victor has always been a really, really solid, really skilled guitar player. I always thought his riffs were very, very catchy and really cool. His solo work is really cool with the guitar. It's just awesome. I mean, when I listened to the song Lost and Found and how the riffs were constructed on that and the solos and stuff, it was just awesome. Tommy Victor definitely still has what it takes to make great music. And this album, let me tell you, to those people who say this album is their best work since the 90s, I agree. I thought this was a really, really, really good album. Probably this album has some really good modern influence in metal with a little bit of an old school philosophy added into it, to the point where this album was just like modern thrash meeting the old days. Like, Prong has always been very underappreciated, underrated among music fans in general, because they're mostly known for that song, for those songs Lost and Found and Snap Your Fingers, Snap Your Neck, but they just got much more to it. This album showed that they had still have some great songs to come up with. So, you had some great thrash riffs and solos. Tommy Victor's voice was so rock solid. The drums I thought was one of the MVP moments of the track of the album was the drums. And Prong, band who's been around since the 80s, maybe now don't get as much appreciation as from many fans, and they deserve people to listen to them more. They deserve to have people check out pretty much all their work. I think Prong is definitely maybe one of, if not maybe the most underrated band in the history of heavy metal, because they just have great songs, some really rock solid thrash material with a little bit of like a hardcore-esque kind of vibe to it, especially their early stuff. But Prong, man, still going strong, still a good band. I like them. This album was awesome. 8.5 out of 10. Really, really good album. This could be one that could make the top 10 cut. Maybe not, depending on what other albums sound like coming after, because I am doing the top 20 albums list at the end of the year, pretty much around mid-December. And we'll see what happens. But this is a really good album. I would recommend it. It was really solid. And there you go. But anyways, rock on! Ha ha ha!